Usually, OCD and anxiety simmers away in the background, stays sort of latched, sort of chronically in that sort of coasting phase where you're going along, not feeling great, but you don't know what to do to get better, and you're just in that position, sort of hovering along there. Now, because OCD recovery is hugely misunderstood, and it takes a lot more work than most people presume, most people are in that position. Most people are in that position. And then they think when they go from place to place for help, they think, I'm a lost cause, I'm treatment resistant, I'm never going to get better. And that then becomes the problem, because it all becomes in their head more and more in their mind, that belief that they're a lost cause, nothing's worked, they've tried everything, so they're not going to improve past that point. Now, what happens then is they become hopeless. They only want to expend the energy to get better, which they think will make them make steps ahead, if not staying in that position that's uncomfortable, but comfortable enough, which becomes the coasting position. Now, the other mistake that people make is that people presume that it's like something doing it to them. So it becomes like this. Why is this happening to me? This shouldn't be happening. This shouldn't be this hard. This shouldn't be like this. But it is. OCD is a pretty resilient thing. If it was easy, everyone would just be recovering like that. And forums and Facebook groups wouldn't be very busy, right? There wouldn't be many people in there talking. But the reality is that most people with chronic OCD are still suffering on some level. The reason being, they don't understand how to recover, how to disable the OCD in that chronic form. And they also haven't done the things needed to improve. It's as simple as that. I try and keep it simple because it often gets misinterpreted so much. The problem is also with what people call recovery, because they don't want to offend people, and that becomes a problem. Recovery, by definition, needs to be the absence of chronic guilt, chronic anxiety, chronic shame. It needs to be the absence of that. The OCD, all the OCD problems that cause the suffering, that needs to have gone. That doesn't mean you're never going to be re-triggered by an anxious situation. You will, but if it's chronic anxiety, then that's the suffering again. So it needs to be the absence of that. Now, the problem is, what happens is when people improve and get better, they then often mistake that for recovery then when they suddenly then get bad again, because they go up and down in that sort of OCD roller coaster where it's sort of laying dormant. The more scary fears are laying dormant once again. So they feel relief, think they've recovered, then bang, and then they become frustrated that they sort of feel like they kidded themselves to get to that point and they didn't in fact recover. So recovery has to be the absence of that. Now, along the journey, you can get sort of 90% recovery, being living fine. It doesn't make much difference that you haven't fully recovered. That's pretty good anyway. You're living well enough. So great functioning, okay? But the problem is when we start calling recovery just sort of putting up with, lumping the symptoms up, as I often explain it, and sort of just going along, and that's you're functioning well, but you're still feeling chronic anxiety, panic attacks every few days or whatever. And then people say, well, that's my recovery. Well, that's not recovery. You can't say something's my recovery when it doesn't do what the definition of recovery is. So we've got this notion of not wanting to offend people because people have an idea of what they want recovery to be to them, but that's not actually recovery. So that then leads to people becoming confused and lost, thinking, is that all I've got to look forward to? So we need to be realistic with what it is. Okay. Now, I have to be blunt about that because otherwise this gets misinterpreted, like most things in OCD easily get misinterpreted. And then we move away from the key fact of what it is. So recovery is the absence of chronic anxiety, chronic guilt, and so on, where you can't tell the difference between before you had OCD and OCD. That doesn't mean that you haven't still got OCD. OCD is most likely a genetic thing that makes that anxious cycle become apparent, and we experience that, makes us more susceptible to that anxious loop and chronic guilt, etc. But you don't need rid of that the same as an alcoholic in sobriety doesn't need it. because 90% of the time, 99% of the time, they can't tell the difference, they're fine. That's recovery, okay? So it's not the absence of OCD, it's the absence of suffering. Longer term as well has to be included, otherwise someone could just feel relief intermittently for the moment, then define that as recovery. So you have to be very clear with that.